Good evening, I'm Kitty Pilgrim, and welcome to this special CNNfn report. Tonight, the ultimate capitalist experiment, Russia. Russia now stands at a crossroads. Parliamentary elections are on Sunday. The political jockeying leading up to this has been intense. Now, what's important here is that these elections set the stage for who will eventually take over the Russian presidency from President Boris Yeltsin. Some think this leadership change in the Duma, or parliament, may be helpful in finally putting into place the legislative reform that is needed for Russia to finish the unfinished revolution, leading to a market-based society. Now, will Russia continue to be plagued by its political and economic ills, or will Russia turn a corner and continue the path of economic reform? From time to time, it comes into sharp focus. Russia draws world attention, mostly in times of great upheaval. Historically, this has always been so. Lately, even more so. A war in Chechnya makes little effort to spare civilian life. An ailing president favors crisis leadership by firing his prime ministers. A financial system under siege. Charges of corruption and banking scandal. All these images would seem to point to a bleak future. But this is, after all, Russia, where few things are as they seem. Richard Heisey runs a $40 million U.S. fund that invests in Russian companies. For the first time in years, he is cautiously optimistic.
In 1999, we've seen a much better picture in Russia than anybody anticipated at the end of 1998. At that point in time, it was very much of a doom and gloom. I think domestic manufacturing and industrial production has really come back this year.
The economy is actually growing after 2 disastrous years, helped by the price of oil hitting 9-year highs, giving Russia a burst of much-needed capital. And the collapse of the ruble, a financial debacle at the time, turned up unexpected benefits. Russian-made goods have now come into vogue because consumers can no longer afford pricey imports. The Red October chocolate factory turns out candy for domestic sale and consumption. Business is booming. This Moscow brewery makes a product that is much more affordable than imported beer. The political picture is improving also. Up until now, stability is hung on a frail leader who has changed his government on a whim.
Коллеги, покажите, пожалуйста, результат.
Many think the parliamentary elections on December 19th may put in legislators that are more willing to vote in laws that are essential for democracy and capitalism.
I take a rather optimistic view of the current Russian scene, and it seems to me that most of the major parties are prepared to move in a free enterprise capitalist direction, are prepared to work with the West over the next 4 or 5 years.
If they would deal with legislation protecting minority rights in Russian companies, which today is a very contentious issue, I would say this would be a giant step forward.
The parties that win in this election take the upper hand in putting forth their candidates for the presidential elections in June. As always with Russia, all the vast potential and wishful thinking of bringing Russia into the global economy could come to nothing. The attacks on Chechnya, with the heavy toll of civilian casualties, has already drawn Western criticism and hints of international sanctions.
I'm deeply disturbed by reports that suggest that innocent Chechens will continue to bear the brunt of this war, and not the militants Russia is fighting. Russia will pay a heavy price for those actions.
International politics aside, Russia still has a long road ahead.
As the economy improves, that could contribute to an overall stabilization of their economy, and there may be less destructive kinds of corruption. On the other hand, if they squander the opportunity that this year has given them, a pretty good year, if they squander it by this destructive and brutal war that they're waging in Chechnya, and by failing to enact reforms, then they're going to continue to be in a very difficult, I think, negative spiral for the next several years.
And the next week could hold the key to what those next years may bring. Well, coming up, we'll bring you a look at the major players in this election. We'll also have analysis on the parties and their policies from Stephen Cohen, professor of Russian Studies at New York University, and Michael Barr, emerging markets analyst at HP Capital Markets Group.